Welcome, everyone, to week 2, where we'll be discussing Hinduism. As we begin each week's discussion, I'll pose a question to try to give you an experience that might allow you to relate to the various religions that we'll be discussing in our class. This week, the question I'd like you to think about is, have you ever felt like you were in a dream? Has life ever seemed unreal to you? Did life ever seem inauthentic or illusory in some way, fake? If you ever felt this way, you may have something in common with Hinduism. So, what do you associate with Hinduism? We'll take a virtual visual tour of various images that you may have associated with Hinduism. And these images will set up our discussions for the rest of the week. Maybe you're familiar with the various gods and goddesses within Hinduism, or familiar with the idea that some people have of Hinduism as being polytheistic, meaning they believe in many gods. Maybe you're familiar with altars or associate the use of altars with Hinduism. Maybe colorful and elaborate temples come to mind. Maybe what comes to mind are various religious ceremonies and holidays and sacred events. If you've never been to India, upon your first visit, you may be surprised to see how commonplace cows are within the community, especially in city streets, and how revered cows are. Maybe when you think of Hinduism, you think of the caste system, something which many of you may have studied back in high school world history or high school sociology, or social studies, I should say. Not too long ago, when people thought of Hinduism, the first things or images that would come to mind would be images of various individuals who were able to perform extraordinary physical feats, seemingly able to overcome the limitations of their body by fine tuning their minds. In the West, we see this popularized in yoga classes, all of which we'll also discuss in this coming week. Maybe the idea of some sort of guru or swami, spiritual teacher, or maybe simply the idea of meditation is something that comes to mind when you think of Hinduism. There's a video that I'd like you to watch within this lecture that goes through a day or a few days, I guess, within the life of a British Indian family. I should say British Hindu family. Now, as we talk about various religions and as we show video clips of various religions, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that there are so many variations on each of these religions, so many ways of practicing, so many ways of participating, that it's kind of hard to say that there's a stereotypical or common approach or common style of living associated with each of these. So just keep that in mind as we go through the material throughout the quarter. What we present may not be what you're familiar with or may not be what you see on an everyday basis. They're simply samples. So the video I'd like you to watch for this lecture is simply a sample. If you're not familiar with Hinduism, if you don't know many people who practice, so we'll just simply give you a glimpse of one family's approach to Hinduism. So this might be an odd question to think about, but it's a really important one when we discuss Hinduism in particular. In order to understand Hinduism, we might want to ask first, is there really such a religion as Hinduism? Now, what I mean by that is that when we take a look at the roots of Hinduism, we don't necessarily see one monolithic sort of entity, one religion. What we see is a group or various forms of religious practices and religious beliefs. What we can say is that they all stem from an area in India. In particular, this area in the Indus Valley. Now, when we think of the word Hindu, it doesn't pertain to an individual. It's not a name of any group per se, but it does stem from this region. Hindu comes from the term Sindhu, which means water or ocean or body of liquid. And it is this term where it's from Sindhu that we get Hindu, and it's also where we get the term Indus, as in the Indus Valley and Indus River, right? Body of water. So really, when we're talking about Hinduism, we're talking about a term that other cultures, other people applied in general to all of the groups and all of the societies that lived within this region. As an outsider looking in, sometimes it's easier simply to label everybody under one broad term. So let's summarize then some basic components or elements of Hinduism. There's no central orthodoxy, meaning there's no governing body, unlike, let's say, the Catholic Church, where there's an institution with a governing individual like the Pope. In Hinduism, that sort of organizational structure doesn't exist. Now, can you imagine what that means then for practice and beliefs? It means that there's not necessarily an authoritative figure for these sorts of things. And as a result, Hinduism is pretty well known for being very accepting of other religious beliefs, other religious practices. Unlike, say, Buddhism, where we have an individual that founded the religion, there is no there's no single individual who we can point to as being the founder of Hinduism. The commonality amongst all of these people that we broadly label Hindu is really the belief in these sacred texts, or the fact that they hold these particular texts sacred. They include the Vedas, the Upanishads, the laws of Manu, the epics, and there'll be two that we'll take a look at, and the Puranas. So let's take a moment to delve into each of these. The Vedas, which roughly translated refers to knowledge or wisdom, is said to have come from individuals who were divinely inspired, or who were able to see through and experience knowledge. These were the rishis. The Vedas are thought to be the oldest sacred text, being compiled over a 2,000-year period beginning over 6,000 years ago. Within the Vedas are various hymns of various nature-based deities. And towards the end of the Vedas, we'll see a section referred to as the Upanishads. So the term Upanishads can be roughly translated to mean to sit near. And you can imagine that we want to get closer to something, closer to the truths, or closer to the wisdom that's contained within the Vedas. So as I mentioned a second ago, it's towards the end of the Vedas where we have this mainly philosophical text, as opposed to these various hymns towards gods or about gods and goddesses. We are now focused primarily on making sense of this, asking broader questions about the nature of reality and life within the Upanishads. In particular, there's an emphasis on the philosophy about the supreme reality. The term used to label this supreme reality is Brahman. So, in many ways, when we take a look and delve deeper into Hindu mythology, we'll see references to lots of gods and goddesses. We'll see practices where individuals seem to do lots of praying and worshiping of various gods. But within the Upanishads, the focus is on a single supreme reality, the ground of all being, which means that from which everything arises, that from which is the essence of all things. And it is said to be beyond words. And we'll notice this a lot when we look at various other religions, when they try to describe the ultimate within reality, the ultimate person, the ultimate thing, the ultimate truth. It's often said to be beyond words, and Brahman is no different. So Brahman is often then described simply with metaphor, knowing full well that what we're doing is describing with metaphor. When Brahman is discussed and given characteristics, the three characteristics it is most closely associated with are Sat, Chit, Ananda. So Sat refers to reality itself. So Brahman is reality itself, the ultimate truth, ultimate reality, without any clouding of perception. Chit refers to pure awareness, pure consciousness. Brahman is pure awareness itself. And Ananda, which is pure joy, pure bliss. Now, for many, when they think of Brahman, especially in the West, we often associate it with our understanding of the term God. However, when people often use the term God in the West, they often use it to represent a personal reality, right? A personal being, a personal supreme being. And Brahman isn't a being per se. It is that from which all being arises. It is the underlying ground of reality itself. So it's not personal in the sense that there's an individual that's called Brahman. It is reality itself. So in the Upanishads, what we really see then is a treatise on life. It discusses the relationship between our individual selves, that which makes us unique, Atman, and this ultimate reality, Brahman. It discusses the nature of that relationship. What is our place in ultimate reality? How do we see ourselves within reality? How do our lives make sense in the grand scheme of reality? The laws of Manu. If you read mythology, Hindu mythology, you'll discover that the laws of Manu is said to come from the son of a deity, Brahma, and the laws are meant to give us a description of how to best live life amongst other people. So that includes ethical guidelines, ways to structure our societies, and you would see a description of the concept of the caste system. If you ever watch soap operas, if you're familiar with them, you often notice that there are often these long, drawn out, convoluted, complex stories having to do with relationships, oftentimes familiar relationships. And this is what we see within the epics. They are large, grand soap operas dealing with kings and gods and goddesses and rulers and kingdoms. What's interesting to note is that these stories aren't just meant for our entertainment, but are meant as a philosophical reflection, as a poetic reflection on the Vedas, and in particular the Upanishads, to bring to light the meaning and essence of the philosophy that can be found in the previously discussed sacred texts. So, as you read about for today, Smith discusses the purposes of life that is espoused by Hinduism. in particular, that's espoused through the epics. Before we begin delving into that, you might want to take a moment to pause the video and write down for yourself what it is you want in life, what it is that you want out of life. You're in school, you are looking for an education. What is it that you're searching for? What is it that you want? Why are you doing this? Many of you probably work also, either part-time or full-time. Why are you doing that? What's the point of that? What is it you really want? If you take a look at your day and all the activities you fill your days with, what does that say about what you prioritize in your life? And what do those priorities say about what it is you really want? Hinduism will give us specific answers to this. Within the epics, we see four. Smith classifies these four into two groups: the path of desire. So at one point in your life, if not currently, you probably notice that what you often pursue is pleasure. You often pursue things that make you feel good. This path to get what you want or to be happy is kama. The other path of desire is artha. In addition to simply just feeling good, what we often desire is social satisfaction. We desire to grow wealth and to grow in terms of prosperity, to increase our power and our social influence in the world. What might be an issue if we solely pursue the path of desire in order to attain happiness? Can you think to yourself what downfalls, what pitfalls there might be if our approach to a good life was simply to feel good, to eat what we want, to watch TV all day, to snack on candy and potato chips, or to simply grasp for power or for money, if that was solely it? What Hinduism says is that beyond these two, we eventually grow to realize that there's more to life than simple pleasure and social satisfaction. It is here that Smith provides us with a different category, the path of renunciation. And the third approach to getting what you want, to being what it is you want out of life, is dharma, duty. In this sense, what we desire most is to give and to serve the community, to live a good, ethical life. In many ways, this can be seen as a natural evolution of our psychological development, where when we are young, we simply go after what it is that makes us feel good. And as we get older, we start to develop different priorities. And we start to realize that life, a good life, is more than simply feeling good or getting a good pat on the back or getting money and possessions and goods. We don't start to realize that life is more than that. And life might start to include being self-sacrificing, doing things for others, doing things to better the community. But beyond this, after a certain age, says Hinduism, you may even outgrow this sort of approach to happiness. As a result, you may realize that what you really, truly want, beyond all of those first three paths, is moksha. What you might end up realizing is beyond pleasure, beyond social satisfaction, beyond doing good and living ethically, doing your duty. Beyond that, what you might eventually realize is that underlying all of those is a desire for freedom, ultimate liberation. Now, the question would be, liberation from what exactly? This term moksha indicates that our deepest, truest selves want escape from all of life's limitations, because what we want is ultimate freedom. In particular, it is said that this freedom is specifically about wanting to be, having ultimate experience of existence, boundless existence, not limited existence, boundless existence, completely free from the limitations of beingness to ultimate beingness. Second, we want to know, we want to understand, we want to have awareness, but we want ultimate awareness. We want ultimate freedom from the limitations of ignorance. So boundless knowledge and boundless wisdom. Lastly, and third, what we want freedom from is we want freedom from any sort of limitations on our happiness. We want ultimate happiness. We want boundless happiness, boundless joy, boundless well-being. Now, what does this sound like? This should remind you of something we just spoke about a few minutes ago. Sat, Chit, Ananda. It sounds like the characteristics that are often attributed to the ultimate underlying ground of all being, Brahman. And it is in this sense that you may often hear within Hindu philosophy the notion that what we want more than anything else is to return to source, to reconnect with the underlying ultimate reality from which we all come from. In Western terms, we might want to think about this, or we can phrase this to say we want to reunite with God. We want to reconnect with the ultimate. However, this is only one perspective. The other perspective says our desire for boundless happiness, for boundless awareness, for boundless beingness isn't a calling to reconnect with Brahman, but it's a calling to remember that we were never disconnected from Brahman in the first place, that there is no gap between us and ultimate reality, that Atman, our individual selves, and Brahman, the ultimate reality, isn't separate, but is in fact the same. Atman is Brahman. You are God. We've just simply forgotten. As we move on to the next lectures, we'll discuss both of these two different approaches to moksha. The first is referred to as the yoga school, and practices that the yoga school discusses will be about how to reconnect and reunite with Brahman. And the other approach is the Advaita Vedanta, which refers to realization and waking up to your true nature, your true authentic self as being Brahman.